On the 30th of April 1975, the fall of Saigon, South Vietnam surrenders, and the beginning of the end for South Vietnam. Now, the South Vietnamese stronghold of Saigon, now known as Ho Chi Minh City, falls to the People's Army of Vietnam and the Viet Cong on the 30th of April 1975. The South Vietnamese forces had collapsed under the rapid advancement of the North Vietnamese. The most recent fighting had begun in December 1974, when the North Vietnamese had launched a major attack against the lightly defended province of Pang Long, located due north of Saigon along the Cambodian border, overrunning the provincial capital of Phang Bien on the 6th of January 1975. Despite previous presidential promises to provide aid in such a scenario, the United States did nothing. By this time, Nixon had resigned from office, and his successor, General R. Ford, was unable to convince a hostile Congress to make good on Nixon's earlier promises to rescue Saigon from communist takeover. Because Nixon had Watergate, General R. Ford was very unpopular and the only unelected official in US history, and Congress just signed a bill for Vietnamization, so what's the point of getting back into Vietnam now, right? Now, this situation emboldened the North Vietnamese, who launched a new campaign in March 1975. The South Vietnamese forces fell back in total disarray, and once again, the United States did nothing because it couldn't do nothing. The South Vietnamese abandoned Pleiku and Kong Tum in the highlands with very little fighting. Then Quang Tri, Hue, and Da Nang fell to the communist onslaught and even steamroll. The North Vietnamese continued to attack south along the coast towards Saigon, defeating the South Vietnamese forces at each encounter except one unit. The South Vietnamese 18th Division had fought a valiant battle at Quang Loc, just to the east of Saigon, destroying 3 North Vietnamese divisions in the process. However, it proved to be the last battle and very futile in the defense of the Republic of South Vietnam. The South Vietnamese forces held out against the attackers until they ran out of tactical air support, weapons, logistics, bullets, water, food, ammunition, everything pretty much, and finally abandoned Quang Loc to the communists on the 21st of April, 1975. Having crushed the last major organized opposition before Saigon, the North Vietnamese got into position for the final assault. In Saigon, South Vietnamese President Nguyen Van Thuy resigned and transferred authority to Vice President Tran Van Hoa before fleeing the city on the 25th of April. By the 27th of April, the North Vietnamese had completely encircled Saigon and began to maneuver for the complete takeover like Dien Bien Phu. When the attack at dawn on the 30th of April, they met little resistance. North Vietnamese tanks crushed through the gates of the presidential palace, and the war came to an end, and the most iconic shot of the Vietnam War was taken. North Vietnamese Colonel Bo Tien accepted the surrender from General Dong Vang Mien, who had taken over from Trang Vach Ho and only spent 1 day in power. Tien explained to Minh, "You have nothing to fear. Between Vietnamese there are no victors and no vanquished. Only the Americans have been beaten. If you are patriots, consider this a moment of joy. The war for our country is over." And with that being said, that's the end of the video. And that's the end of Saigon, now known as Ho Chi Minh City. But with that being said, did you know that on the 30th of April, oh wait, I already said the 30th of April, but did you know that Saigon falls on